Hunter Schafer, everybody.
Hi.
Okay, everybody's like very loud, very pumped for you to be here. I was hyping her up backstage and she was kind of having a holy shit moment. Is it settling in that the show is really taking off?
It's been like the past 2 weeks, I think, that it's like kind of clicked. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's really wild. It's really weird, but yeah, I don't know. It's taken some getting used to.
Yeah. Well, of course, we're all huge fans of the show, and we know a lot about Jules, but we don't know a lot about Hunter. So I just wanted you to kind of give us a little bit of your backstory. You're only 20 years old. This is the first show you've ever done. How did this all happen?
Yeah. I was like a full-time model in New York. These were my tromping grounds. And I remember seeing like an open call floating around on Instagram and like hearing buzz about this open call for this project. And I don't think it even had a name at that point, or it had a name, but like it wasn't out. And I was like, oh, that's cool. They're casting a trans girl, blah, 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 blah. And then a few days later, my model agency called me and said I had been like called in to audition for this role. So I was like, okay, I'll give it a shot, I guess. And I mean, I had like had some interest in acting, but never really given it like a shot or like actually tried. So yeah, I got the sides. I went in. And then kept getting called back. And like, meanwhile, like, you know, I was getting ready to go to school. Like, I wanted to be a fashion designer. Still do, like, at some point, that'd be cool. But yeah, just kind of kept going. And then, like, you know, a month or two later, I'm in the final audition, like with a bunch of HBO execs in LA, and and I found out later that day that I was going to be playing Jules. So
you tripped and fell into Euphoria, which is wild.
yes.
And obviously there are two big names attached to the project. Drake is a producer and Zendaya you star alongside. And the two of you obviously have an extremely special connection on screen. But what was it like to go into this project knowing that these two people were attached to the project and it's your first?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really know until like I think being attached or like actually having gotten the role. And so yeah, like Z and I didn't really like do a chemistry test or anything. And in that sense, I think we got really lucky that like we just like click really well. And then also like having Drake is obviously amazing, you know, as a part of this like whole world that this team has built. So yeah.
I love that you call her Z. Oh. Like, that's when you know it's real. Like, she has like a cute little nickname.
Yeah, I didn't realize it. That's what everyone calls her, yeah.
I love that. And obviously, Sam Levinson is also the creator of the show, which, I mean, you guys speak so highly of him. And one of the really cool things is, I know that you talk about kind of filling in the pieces of Jules and who she is, her identity, and all of those things. I want you to talk a little bit about that, how that even happened, and why it's so important, because I know, like you said, it was like a casting call for a trans character, and that's so cool. But the way that they do it in this show is so, so unique. So what part of that was kind of your doing, and what was Sam's?
Yeah, I mean, before I was attached and I like had just gotten, I think I had gotten the first 4 scripts when I was auditioning. But even before I got the full scripts, I guess I was a little nervous because like the 3 scenes that I got to audition with were, I don't know for who's been watching, but
Everybody.
but like the kitchen scene in the first episode, the motel scene in the first episode, and then the dick pic tutorial.
You're like not messing around.
Yeah, so I was like, what is this? But I mean, as soon as I got those episodes and was kind of able to really like read the entire progression of the first 4, it really like made sense, and it kind of like dawned on me that, you know, Sam was incredibly talented and like empathetic and like had an understanding of like all his characters in a way that I wouldn't have like necessarily expected from like a white cis guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then once I got the role, I mean, the first thing we did, they kept me in LA a few extra days, and just so that Sam and I could have like a meeting that went hours long at this coffee shop, and we just kind of like delved into each other's lives, and it was like just a matter of like, because he's written himself into all these characters in a lot of ways, and then figuring out how some of my story can fit in as well, and so that we can really like flesh her out, and that's what ended up happening. So it's a weird little like concoction.
What do you think makes you most similar to Jules?
I mean, if I had access to the clothes that Jules has access to in the show, I know my 17-year-old self would have been wearing like everything that she has. Yeah.
The hair and makeup is unreal, and the wardrobe.
That team is absolutely incredible, and we had so much fun. That was also like really collaborative as well. You know, like every time we had to establish a new makeup look, Donnie and I would just like, we'd be like, all right, so what's it gonna be today? Like, what squiggles or lines or sparkles can we, you know, throw on my face, and figure out what works for the scene.
That's so fun. One of my favorite parts of the show is obviously the way that they establish everybody's backstory. And for myself, and I'm sure a lot of others, yours was definitely the hardest to watch. I've watched it a few times now, and every single time it kind of takes me back, and you kind of like lose your breath. Like it's scary. What was your process? Like, did you get to look at all of that, look at this young kid going into a psychiatric ward? Like, what kind of care went into writing that scene? And even though you weren't playing young Jules, obviously, like, what was it like to watch that?
Yeah. So for this particular section of the story, that is something that is really personal to Sam's life, and I remember reading that and being like, wow, like this is really visceral. And I think he said in like an interview, just kind of how surreal it was to like be shooting that and walk into a space that looks so similar to, you know, a place he was at that age. And so I think, yeah, that sector of her story was written like with a lot of care and emotion, and I don't know, I have a lot of respect for Sam for sort of like ripping himself open for that part.
What were some of the hardest parts for you to film, or for you to even like read when it came to who Jules is and like the exploration of her character? Like, was there any scene that you were like, okay, I'm kind of scared to do this, or you had to, I mean, obviously you have to get really vulnerable, but.
Yeah. I mean, I would say the kitchen scene was really, that was a hard day. Just not only because it's like a rough scene for Jules, but it's also, I was also like still feeling like really, really new to acting, and I think I was like really nervous about like being able to deliver, and like, I don't know, I still had some imposter syndrome at this point as far as like being a new actor among like all these like really experienced people, and so I like locked myself in my hotel room all day and like listened to Frank Ocean and Serpent with Feet, and like basically by the end of the day, and we shot this at like 2 a.m, I was exhausted, and then was like even more terrified of like being able to do what I felt like I needed to do for this scene. But Jacob like has been amazing scene partner and like gives himself to every single scene, and it's just I admire him as an actor so much, and so I think like just actually letting it play out was terrifying, but also I don't know, so that was a hard one. And then I don't know, I think as the series like progressed and we kept filming and everything started to feel more real, I think the entire cast can agree that like the lines between what was real and what wasn't like got blurry. We filmed this for 8 months, so it got a little confusing, but in some ways it made it easier because everything felt more real and more like visceral. So
I mean, like you said, your first time acting, Jacob's been, I mean, everybody knows him from like Kissing Booth, obviously, amazing. But there are a lot of people that this is like their big break, and then there are other faces that we've seen before. What has that been like for you? Like, is there any mentor-mentee kind of situation going on set? Or like, how did this whole blended family come together?
Yeah, I mean, I think just having to film something like this project together and be that vulnerable in front of each other like brings anyone together pretty quickly. Just because I don't know, like in some ways, like some of my closest friends haven't seen me in the states that I've had to be in on set, you know? So I mean, just to have to kind of expose yourself like that in front of everybody, like everybody's seen each other like at their best, at their worst, so that brings everyone together. And then also I think we got really lucky because there truly is not like a bad apple on this cast. Like everyone is just, I don't know, like such a sweetie, and
There's nobody you're voting off the island.
no, absolutely not.
One of my favorite things also about Jules is that, I mean, she's such a free spirit. And I think for her narrative, it's particularly interesting because we've seen so much in the past, like when you have this person who is struggling with like their gender identity, there seems to be one narrative for trans characters, and this has completely broken the mold. Why do you think like this was the perfect opportunity to do it? Why do you think audiences are ready for it? And like, do you feel a burden being the person at the center of that? Because I'm sure a lot of people are like, this is historic. We see this trans character who's not just coming right out and saying like, this is who I am. Like there are some cues, but you kind of like have to figure it out. And out of the bunch, she seems to be the most secure in who she is and has to just deal with some external drama.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of my like favorite things about her is that that's resolved, and I think it just allows her to have issues outside of that, and I think it like is a worry that we can fall into the same storyline sometimes, because a lot of the times it's like cis people in the writing rooms and like cis people making the decisions, and I think like a lot of minorities can agree that like you know, oftentimes their like systematic oppressors might only see them being able to tell a specific kind of story, and so like just having like or being allowed to move beyond that and like bring some truth in that, you know, like trans people deal with everyday things and things that cis people deal with. I mean, and while transness may affect the way you move throughout the world, you know, we're more complex than that. And so, so I don't know, I just feel like really lucky in that I really enjoyed telling this story, and yeah.